Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. If you'd like to know more about my knitwear design, please check in the description below. There you will find a link to my Ravelry pattern page where you can see all the designs I've done and maybe get a PDF so that you can knit up one of my patterns yourself. Also in the description below, you will find a link to the Watch Barbara Knit's Facebook group. We'd love to have you come over and join us. It is a place where we can continue the conversation that we start here in the videos, with the added bonus of being able to share pictures, because who doesn't love pictures? If you've knit up one of my pieces, I would love to see a picture of what you've done. So today I have decided this is going to be the first of several videos. I don't honestly know how many videos it's going to be, but it's going to be quite a few because I am on not only my own Facebook group, but several knitting Facebook groups and also Ravelry groups. And for people who are on the beginning edge of knitting, sometimes one of the really frustrating things to do is learn how to actually read a pattern. How do you go about reading a pattern? Because I'm going to be honest with you, they're in code. It's like a secret code. Why are they in code? Well, if you think about it, knitting patterns, when they first started being like written down and published, where was the most frequent place you would maybe find them? Well, one thing would be on the back of the ball band for the yarn you're buying, which they're like little teeny tiny, or in magazines or in books. And every single page counts. Every line inch counts. So it was in the interest of pattern writers to boil the pattern down to its bare possible bones to convey the information as succinctly as possible, which led pattern writers to using a lot of abbreviations and a lot of things like that to cut down the space, and charts. Charts really cut down on space. With Ravelry and PDFs and being able to work directly from like a tablet or something, space isn't as quite as much of a premium, but the established pattern writing, it's just the way that patterns are written now. So you have to learn how to read the patterns. So this is the first lesson, and I'm going to start off. I tried to record this video yesterday and I realized I was still trying to cram too much information into one video. I want to break it up into little digestible chunks so that it's not completely overwhelming, especially if you're a very new knitter. So today I'm just going to go over looking at the specifications of a pattern and what all the but abbreviations and how to understand them. It would be impossible for me to go over every single abbreviation that you might actually run up against, because there are new ones being made up every single day. But I want to teach you about abbreviations and how you can figure them out for yourself. So I'm going to show you over here, or maybe over here. I don't know which side of the screen it's going to be on. This is the front page of one of my patterns. You will see it has pictures, which shows you what the finished piece is going to look like. And then directly below it, you're going to see the title, my name, so you know who did it, and then what's called the romance language. Now, this information frequently will contain thoughts from the designer about inspiration and what led them to do the design, but also can have important information about yarn and colors and things like that. So it can be very important to read this section. Speaking of which, this is one of the things that I think is super important. I like to liken knitting patterns to cooking recipes. When you decide you want to make a recipe, which a knitting pattern simply is a recipe for knitting, you should always sit down and read through the entire thing before you get started. Because with the recipe analogy, who among us hasn't been like, ooh, I'm gonna make this thing, and you get all the ingredients together and you put together, but you hadn't read it first, and then you get everything, and then you hit the point where it says marinate for like 8 hours. And then you're like, I guess I'm not having this roast for dinner tonight. Let's order pizza. But If you read all the way through the knitting pattern, and then you can find out if there's anything in it that maybe confuses you, or if there's something you don't understand, and you can try to figure out what those things are ahead of time. Also, what you can run into, especially in garments, where you'll have something where there's a chunk that says, okay, you're doing this. And after you read through all of it, it'll say, and at the same time, you're supposed to be doing something else. If you just start knitting, you might be knitting that instructions. And then when you hit the at the same time, realize that you were supposed to be decreasing on the other side during the last 15 rows that you knit, and then you're going to get frustrated. So I highly, highly encourage you, when you first get a pattern, sit down, read through the whole thing. Make sure you have all the tools you need. Make sure you have all the yarn materials you need. Make sure you understand all the abbreviations that are being used, and take a look through the instructions and see if there is anything that really jumps out at you as, oh my goodness, I don't know if I know how to do this, or I need to highlight this to make sure that I remember to do it. So read your pattern. Now, Romance language, we've covered this. At the bottom, you can see it has my contact information. If you ever have questions about my patterns, I want you to ask me, and I will do my best to help you have a successful pattern. Below it, you will see the little panel across the bottom, which has the information on yarn, needles, the finished size, and the gauge. All of these things are very, very important. Oh, and the little thing where it's notions. Yarn is frequently going to be listed in the number of skeins you need. It will tell you the yardage, and it should tell you yardage per weight. So you know how much the yardage is and how much it weighs. And you can, if you need to substitute, utilize the yardage and the weight to figure out what substitutes might be good for you. This actually is only one skein. It's just the biggest skein in the entire world. And you would have to figure out if you wanted to substitute a fingering weight yarn that came, actually as a light fingering weight yarn that came in a smaller put up, you'd have to do some math. Because if you just buy one skein that's a regular skein, it's not going to have anywhere near that much yardage. So you have to look at the yardage and the weight. And also look at what the fiber content is, especially if you are substituting. Next is your needles. You need to make sure you have the needles you need. Where it says US size 4, the US measuring system of 4 needles and the European measuring are actually two different things. The United States just assigns numbers, whereas pretty much the rest of the world uses millimeters. So you just need to know a good pattern should have both pieces of information. And then you have your size. This is going to be your finished size. It's going to tell you, and if it's a sized garment, you might have a table later on that gives you all of the specifications, especially if you have like a small, medium, large, extra large. That information is going to be in there someplace. Finally, you have your gauge. I have a whole video on gauge. I'll put a link to it in the description below. You need to check your gauge. And I want to tell you, you've read through your pattern already, so you know at the end whether or not it tells you to block your pattern, block your finished object. I'm going to say 90 to 95% of the time you're going to be blocking your piece. If the pattern is written and instructing you to block it, then this gauge that is giving to you, you can assume safely that this is a blocked gauge. Really, you can assume it's block gauge unless it specifically says unblocked. That is just one of those pattern writing standards. Gauge is provided blocked. So that means when you make your gauge swatch, you need to block it before you measure your stitches and rows per the number of inches. And again, all designers use, sometimes they give you stitches per inch, sometimes it'll give you stitches per 2 inches, sometimes it'll give stitches per 4 inches. You just need to look at what the specific pattern you are using is telling you, because lots of designers do things differently. And so this is all of the information. If your pattern does not contain this information, you might want to seriously reconsider whether or not you want to make the pattern. These are things that are really essential. And if the designer doesn't have the attention to detail to provide you with something, like the size of needle you need, they might not have the best attention to detail to write a pattern that is really going to be followable. Is that a word? I don't know if that's a word, but these pieces of information are all pieces of information that you need. And if they don't give you all the information you need, they might not give you all the information you need in your pattern. So but it might be fine. Just take that as a little teeny grain of salt. Okay. Now let's get down into, you can see on the sidebar, I have a section called stitches. Again, this is something that you should have on every pattern. It could be named appendix, it can be stitch glossary, it can be labeled abbreviations. It should be a section of the pattern. It may not be on the front page, it may be on the back page, it may be anywhere in the thing, but there should be somewhere that the designer has told you what abbreviations they are using and what their specific definitions for those abbreviations are. Specifically, if you can look at this one, I have a slip slip knit. Now there are probably a billion different ways to do a slip slip knit. Everybody does slip slip knit in all different kinds of ways. I specifically define for you that for my pattern and the way I knit it, it is slip two stitches knitwise separately, return to left hand needle, and then knit 2 together through the back loop. Some people will slip 1 stitch knitwise and sew 1 stitch purlwise. Some people like slip 1 pass. I mean, you can substitute if you want, but I am conveying to you this is the way I do it. So if you want it to look exactly like the piece I did, this is how you should do it. But this information should be on your pattern. Also contained in this pattern, it's going to be other kinds of abbreviations. So K means knit. That is something that is pretty universal across the board. Then you've got knit 2 together, knit front back, purl 2 together, REP standing for repeat. That's fairly common. And then you got RS, and then all the way down you have WS. That's telling you right side and wrong side. Again, any abbreviation that is being used by the designer should be in this stitch glossary, appendix, whatever it is you're going to call it, that information should be there. Now, if you are looking at these and you're fuzzy, and again, you're a beginner, you don't even really know how to do a knit 2 together. Most patterns aren't going to really spell out. Like, I spell out how to do a slip slip knit because there's multiple different ways to do a slip slip knit. Knit 2 together is kind of knit 2 together. There's not a whole lot of different ways to do it. So the assumption is you know how to do it. If you find that you don't know, if you come across a abbreviation that the designer doesn't give you like specific instructions how to do it, that means it's just assumed you're going to do the standard way, but you don't know the standard way to do it. That is when YouTube is your friend. Google is your friend. Ravelry is your friend. You can find this information, and what you would want to do is go into Google and Google knitting abbreviation P2TOG. Just type that in and you should get all kinds of hits. One fantastic site is a site called knittinghelp.com, and they go through a whole bunch of different types of knit stitches, and they have videos for a lot of them, and they're done both English and continental, which is fabulous. So I highly recommend. I'll put a link to knittinghelp.com in the description below. But making sure you know how to do the individual stitches before you start the pattern is a really good place to start from. It'll give you the confidence. You can go on Ravelry and ask questions. Honestly, go on YouTube, search for P2TOG, search for that stitch abbreviation. Now, there might be a stitch abbreviation in the glossary that you can't find anywhere. I can promise you that there are patterns that I have that are going to do that, because you know what? I made it up. I had to make the pattern up. There's sometimes the stitch up. Sometimes I want stitches to do something and there's no really standardized way of doing it. And I spend a lot of time on Google and YouTube and try to find if someone has an established, this is the abbreviation for this particular combinations of blah, blah, blah. and I don't. It's not there. So I have to make an abbreviation myself. For those, I very specifically spell out how to do it. If it is fiddly enough, it will actually fall out of that little stitches section and go onto the beginning of the next page, where I'll have a whole paragraph explaining to you how to do that stitch. So abbreviations are knitter code. It is how pattern writers are able to condense a huge amount of information down to a manageable amount of information. So it's like K1, P2. You hear people rattle it off. And simply what that means is if it's K1, that means knit 1. K2, knit 2. K3, knit 3. So if there's a number falling after the K or the P, it's telling you how many of those things to do. So that is a lot of information, I know, so I wanted to stop here. So what we've looked at is reading through the entire pattern, reading the Romance language, see if there's any information in it you need, reading the yarn, needles, notions, materials, making sure you have everything that you need, and evaluating the glossary or the abbreviation section to make sure all that information is there and you know how to do all of the stitches that are used in that particular pattern. So that is your first overview of looking at a pattern, evaluating a pattern, getting towards understanding that pattern. We will have further lessons. That's lesson 1. I want to let that sink in. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments below. If you have specific things that you want to see me address in the next lesson, my plan for the next lesson is understanding how repeats work and the different ways they are written. I think that is going to be a fun next step. If you have, again, specific questions, I want to know what y'all want to know. And hopefully I can answer those questions and move us all towards being incredibly confident in reading knitting patterns. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, click that like button. And if you'd like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications by clicking that little bell. Thank you so much.